Perhaps no other place in the world has captured the imagination as much as Russia, a country filled with phenomenal and fanciful scenes, from golden churches and towering Kremlins to bejeweled icons and mighty czars. After countless rulers and revolutions and 7 tumultuous decades of communist control, Russia remains an extraordinary land. A striking mixture of old tradition and intense change. Russia contains nearly 150 million people and 130 nationalities and ethnic groups that are scattered across 11 time zones from Moscow to Vladivostok. For 1,000 years, the Russian Orthodox Church dominated the life of Russia. When the communists came to power in 1917, they declared religion the opium of the masses and set out to destroy what they considered the ideology of the ruling class. By the end of the 1930s, the number of functioning monasteries and churches dropped from 100,000 to less than 100. Since the collapse of the communist regime, many Russians have returned to the Orthodox faith in search of lasting spiritual values. The renewed importance of religion is one of many changes occurring in a country which has seen tremendous upheaval. Russia is the largest country in the world, sprawling across both Europe and Asia, from Finland in the west to the Pacific Ocean in the east. Many of Russia's neighbors are territories that became independent countries after the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991. Most of Russia's largest cities lie on the European side. The capital, Moscow, with a population of 9 million, is the heart of the nation. It was Prince Ivan Dolgoruki who in 1147 established the first outpost along the Moscow River. The Russian word Kreml was used to describe a fortified stronghold that encircled a town. This mile-and-a-half-long Kremlin wall encompasses over 60 acres of palaces, churches, museums, and Russia's seat of government. All of Russia has been ruled from behind this wall for over 3 centuries. Assumption Cathedral was built at the end of the 15th century during a crucial time in Russian history. It was then that Ivan the Great united many of Russia's principalities to overthrow Mongols who had dominated the land for over 250 years. Within the walls of this cathedral, Russia's monarchs were crowned with an elaborate coronation ceremony. These rulers were buried in the nearby Archangel Cathedral. Here lie 54 of Russia's princes and czars, including Ivan the Great and his son Ivan the Terrible, who was the first Russian ruler crowned with the title Czar of all Russia. Russia was a pagan land until 988, when Prince Vladimir first introduced Byzantine Christianity. Along with a new religion came Byzantine art, architecture, and culture. Multitudes of artists were invited to paint icons and frescoes and decorate the church interiors. Today, restoration work preserves the Kremlin's rich heritage. Red Square, just outside the Kremlin, started as a medieval marketplace. By the 16th century, it was used primarily as a huge gathering place for public events, festivals, and religious processions. St. Basil's Cathedral dominates Red Square. This extraordinary creation was commissioned by Ivan the Terrible in the mid-16th century to commemorate Russia's final victory over the Kazan Khanate, the last stronghold of Mongols in Russia. The fairy tale look of the cathedral is inspired by traditional Russian folk arts and stands in strong contrast to the more academic style of the Kremlin cathedrals. Even though Byzantine architecture has influenced Russian church building, the onion dome is distinctly Russian, a shape well suited to the country's heavy snowfalls. According to legend, after the cathedral was finished, Ivan the Terrible had the two architects blinded, so they would never again create such a work of beauty. The designers of Lenin's mausoleum were in no such danger. This structure of granite, marble, and black labradorite was built in Lenin's honor after his death in 1924. For more than 7 decades, visitors from all over Russia and beyond have been coming to watch the changing of the guard and view the embalmed body of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Lenin is regarded as the father of the Soviet Union. When the Bolsheviks revolted against the government and seized power in 1917, Lenin became the leader of the world's first Soviet state. The highly venerated Lenin died only 7 years later. His cause of death was officially listed as cerebral sclerosis, triggered by excessive intellectual activity. On special occasions, the top of the mausoleum doubled as a pedestal on which communist dignitaries would stand to watch military displays and massive rallies. For much of the 20th century, during May Day or Revolution Day, enormous parades were staged to impress the outside world with the men and might of Russia. No one dared imagine that in less than 75 years, Lenin's dream of a united communist world would disintegrate. One of the most remarkable sights in the world is that of Red Square and the cathedrals and towers of the Kremlin. One early traveler remarked that the city might have been the invention of Dante, arrived in heaven, for Moscow embodies fantasy on an unearthly scale. And this grandiose vision continued on to the Soviet era, when Gothic-style skyscrapers, huge concrete housing complexes, and factories were erected haphazardly throughout the city. In contrast to the stark modern socialist architecture, there are still all the cozy side streets to discover, little changed in the past decades. A familiar sight for every Muscovite is the poplar tree, which sheds an abundance of white, fluffy flowers. Early summer is always marked by poplar flowers blowing through the air. For many generations, the Arbat street has been one of the most popular meeting and shopping spots in Moscow. This cobblestone pedestrian passage, which is over 500 years old, marks one of the most famous areas of the city. During the communist era, performance artists and street musicians were strictly banned here. Today, the Arbat district embodies all the changes currently sweeping the country. It encourages individual enterprise on every level.
My
name is Milana, and I study in a special music school. I still have a lot longer to learn. So far, I've only finished the 6th grade. In summer, I come to work here on the Arbat. I usually work every other day for 6 to 7 hours.
For many centuries, Russia was renowned for its rich culture in literature, music, dance, and visual arts. Today, it's hard to imagine how much artistic activity was destroyed or controlled under the Soviet regime. An art style called Socialist-Realism was officially prescribed for the masses by the Communist Party and enforced by party censors. Artists had to produce works honoring the common man or proletariat. These days, many of the monuments and statues have fallen into a state of disrepair. As long as any Russian can remember, not only has art been regulated by the government, but it has also been heavily subsidized. The price of tickets remains fairly cheap. On the other hand, prices of consumer goods, especially cars, are very high due to a large luxury tax. Only a few Russians can afford to buy a car. Most rely on public transportation. Fortunately, there is the metro, one of the quickest and easiest ways of getting around the city. Over 10 million people ride the metro daily. Muscovites have always displayed a proprietary pride in their metro. It remains remarkably clean and graffiti-free. For most metro riders, the day ends in one of the numerous apartment complexes that make up Moscow's suburbs. There has long been a housing shortage in Russia, especially in Moscow. Most people who live in these areas have waited for many years to be assigned to their own apartment. Even then, these apartments are generally quite small and cramped. To make matters even worse, under socialism, few entertainment spots were allowed to operate at night. Even going to a bar was considered a decadent activity by the Communist Party. Today, Russian youth are experiencing more freedom and openness than in the entire history of post-revolutionary Russia. Early Russian expansion in the 16th century followed the river Volga. The Volga, Europe's longest river, flows 2,300 miles to the Caspian Sea. Nizhny Novgorod, meaning Lower Novgorod, is one of the oldest towns on the Volga River. It was built in the 13th century to guard Russia's eastern border and to serve as a base and fortified stronghold for further conquest and expansion down the Volga. Up to the 18th century, a typical Russian town was surrounded by a Kremlin. Watchtowers were built at strategic points along the Kremlin wall to serve as the city's fortified windows. The posad, or earth town within the Kremlin, contained the settlement of traders and craftsmen. Most of the other townspeople lived in settlements known as the slobody outside the Kremlin walls. Even though the glorious times of prosperous merchants and bustling trade have long since faded, Nizhny Novgorod still remains closely connected to the Volga. Most of the personnel for the ships on the river are trained at the local ship academy. The academy is equipped with modern training equipment that simulates the various river conditions a ship may encounter. It lets students practice and make mistakes that could otherwise prove costly or fatal in a real river situation.
Это, знаете что? Это эффект какой? Это присасывание. Его подсосало. Этого нет.
Captain Popov is one of the many graduates from Nizhny Novgorod Academy. He has been navigating the Volga River for over 30 years. Of all rivers, none is more important to Russians than the Volga. One Russian writer reflected that the Volga flows in the heart of every Russian. Russians compare their national character to this river, open and friendly, and at the same time mighty, fierce, and capable of overcoming any obstacle. Much of Russia's folk art stems from the Volga area, the heartland of Russia. Towns were once identified by their own unique style of painting or handicraft. Not far from Nizhny Novgorod is the region of Semyonovskoye Khokhloma. For nearly 3 centuries, artisans here have been admired for their carved wooden kitchenware and furniture. Their particular handicraft has long been known as Khokhloma lacquerware. The shaped pieces are coated in aluminum powder that is baked onto the wooden surface in special ovens. Remarkably, the lacquerware can hold both hot and cold liquids without any harm to the painted surface. Some distance downstream lies the city of Volgograd, better known historically by its old name of Stalingrad, the site of one of the most decisive battles of World War II. These steps lead to the top of Mamayev Hill, where a memorial park honors all those killed during the Battle of Stalingrad. Fresh graffiti on the steps reads, "For Motherland, for Stalin," the World War II battle cry of the Soviet Army. The German army invaded Stalingrad in the summer of 1942. During the 7 months of intense fighting, nearly 1 million bombs were dropped on the city. Here in the Hall of Military Glory, 32 mosaic plaques carry the names of the fallen. Both Hitler and Stalin issued direct orders for each army to fight to the last man. Over 1 million people were killed before the Germans surrendered on February 2nd, 1943. The last town on the Volga River is Astrakhan, founded in the 13th century. Here, as everywhere else in Russia, churches and bell towers are finally being repaired after years of neglect. Bell ringing was once a highly respected art, but sadly today, not one professional bell ringer can be found within the city. With no teacher, these two have simply learned to improvise, for no one remembers how the bells of Astrakhan used to sound. From centuries past, once vibrant frescoes that appeared on this church exterior have faded. Since this artwork is too expensive to restore, artists now use oil paints to touch up and redecorate the outer walls. For over 700 years, Astrakhan has been a major crossroad between Russia and the rest of Asia. At a local market dating back to the 15th century, the ethnic mix is as diversified as the wares being sold. The most numerous of the indigenous groups are the Tartars, descendants of the former Mongol rulers. But there are also Uzbeks, Kazakhs, Iranians, Turkomen, and other peoples from the shores of the Caspian Sea and beyond. Russia's second biggest city and a former capital is St. Petersburg, called Leningrad for most of the 20th century. Tsar Peter the Great chose the site for his namesake city on the desolate shores of the Gulf of Finland to gain an outlet to the sea and open Russia to the west. The building of St. Petersburg started in 1703. It was one of the first cities in the world built to preconceived plans. Astonishingly, after only 9 years, Peter the Great proclaimed his beloved city the new capital of the Russian Empire. A life-size equestrian statue of Peter, which stands in the city center, is the most famous sculpture in the country. By the end of his 36-year reign, the enormous 6'7" ruler had equally oversized achievements. Peter forced more changes on Russia than any other Tsar, opening up the country to Western culture and trade. The citizens of St. Petersburg pride themselves on inheriting Peter's spirit of independence. The dock workers of the city were the first to break away from central communist control and create a union of their own. As a result, these workmen are the best paid blue-collar group in Russia. An image of St. Petersburg would not be complete without the view that has for centuries greeted the incoming ships. Just on the other side of the Neva River stands the Winter Palace, which also contains the famous Hermitage Museum created by Catherine the Great. In its endless stairways and hallways and 1,057 rooms, the museum holds over 2 million pieces of art, too many to be displayed all at the same time. The architecture and the luxurious interiors are often just as amazing as the art in the Hermitage collection. The Winter Palace faces the Palace Square, a location for events ranging from parades to uprisings. It was also the official site of the first battle of the Bolshevik Revolution. Although St. Petersburg is no longer Russia's administrative capital, it is still its unofficial arts capital, attracting a rich variety of performing artists. Only the best get to appear before St. Petersburg's audiences. Peter the Great was determined to measure up to his Western counterparts in every way. In 1709, he ordered a magnificent summer palace built 18 miles from the city, modeled on the French Palace of Versailles. He named it Petrodvorets, or Peter's Palace. The estate contains countless fountains which are decorated with mythological water creatures. Another reason people love to visit St. Petersburg in the summer is to experience the White Nights, a period between June and July when the sun never seems to set. During the summer months, those who want to enjoy a beach and swim in warm seas must go south in Russia to the coast of the Black Sea, lands annexed by Catherine the Great at the end of the 19th century. Novorossiysk is Russia's largest port city on the Black Sea, situated at the foothills of the Caucasus Mountains. It lies along a bay surrounded by hills which are planted with orchards and vineyards. Vacationers use Novorossiysk mainly as a gateway to smaller towns and resorts in the region. The resort towns along the Black Sea long ago replaced the fishing villages. Boris Kadyrov is one of the few remaining fishermen. The months during the high tourist season aren't very good for fishing. The catch is much bigger in winter. In the summer, Boris manages to catch just enough fish to feed himself. During this season, many of the other local fishermen have left to work in the orchards and their own garden plots. But their children love to join Boris to spend a fun day at sea. Russia's character and identity have long been influenced by the fact that it spreads across two different continents, Europe and Asia. The border between the two follows the line of the Ural Mountains. The Urals also mark the beginning of Siberia. The word Siberia comes from the Tartar word sibir, meaning sleeping land. Siberia covers over 5 million square miles. It is larger than both the United States and Europe combined. The people of Siberia grew from a mix of adventurers and fortune seekers who settled in the area voluntarily, and from those who were forced here for either criminal or political reasons. Caucasians now far outnumber the indigenous Asian population. The cities around the Urals supply Russia with building materials, semi-precious and precious stones, and countless other minerals. In the midst of the thinly populated wilderness lies Lake Baikal, the foremost natural wonder of Siberia. It is the oldest lake in the world, formed 25 to 30 million years ago. Scientists estimate that more than 1,500 life forms found nowhere else on Earth live in and around this lake. Lake Baikal is 400 miles long and encompasses an area of over 12,000 square miles. It is the world's largest reservoir of drinking water. It contains 1/6 of all fresh water found on the planet. The largest city on the east side of Lake Baikal is Ulan-Ude. It lies in the border area between the Siberian forests and the grassy steppes. Ulan-Ude was first established by the Russians during the country's eastward expansion in the 16th and 17th centuries. It served then as a trading center and outpost for the Tsar's tax collectors. Today, Ulan-Ude is an average Siberian town without much distinction, except for a strange relic in the main square. It is the largest head of Lenin in the world, over 25 feet tall. Rumor has it that, ironically, the monument was inspired by the large heads of Buddha common to this area before the Soviet takeover. At its easternmost point, Russia ends in the Western world. On its northeastern border, the last Russian island is just a mere 2 miles away from the westernmost lands of the United States. The largest city on Russia's Pacific coast is Vladivostok. Even though it lies in Siberia, the southern location allows the city to enjoy ice-free waters year-round. Vladivostok is a fairly young city, founded in 1860 as the fortified port of Russia's Far East. The last Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, laid the foundation stone. In its early days, Vladivostok attracted independent-minded and free-spirited people, a heritage that's still alive in spite of several decades of communist rule. The nationwide anti-religious campaigns were so thorough in Vladivostok that only one Russian Orthodox church survived. Today, it remains the only one. Attendance at daily services is still relatively low, but now that religion is no longer restricted, people also come to church to celebrate major events in their lives. The demand for weddings is so high that the church authorities decided to break from tradition and conduct not one but several weddings at the same time. These newlyweds, who were brought up without any religious education, must be guided by the priest through the ceremony. The couples are so tired and confused by the end of the long Orthodox service that they actually forget to kiss. Just as these newlyweds do, Russia faces an exciting yet uncertain future, redefining itself in a new era. Few other nations can compare to Russia in its vast size, its turbulent history, and the remarkable endurance of the human spirit. In the words of one native writer, "You are both wretched and abundant, oppressed and powerful, Mother Russia."